One. Hi, welcome, Dr. Kurt Jefferson. Thanks for getting curious with me again today. I got a lot of curiosity to poke around with you around college football, and it occurred to me that you're a big Missouri Tigers fan. You're a big sports fan, but you're also a fan of innovation and what's next and what can we learn from today to anticipate the future tomorrow. And I just got off a really cool Spaces with Matt Fisher and Jay Sparks talking about the upcoming Mizzou football game this Saturday, and it collided with something else that I had seen this week about college football, and that's what happened in Utah, with all of the scholarship players receiving a brand new Ford truck, and it was all over social media, all over the news and everything else. And I guarantee Utah is going to be getting some players they may not have gotten otherwise because of that. And just kind of offhanded on the Spaces with the Matt and Jay, I thought, well, what if, because we all have ties to Columbia, Missouri too. It's like, well, what if Mizzou pulls off this victory on Saturday? Which local business in Columbia could, ready for this one, pounce on the opportunity after a Tiger fight and a Missouri Tiger win to come in and say, you know what, every single scholarship player gets a, pizza from Pizza Tree, or a truck from, was it Joe Mackins, or you name it. But I just wanted to toss over to you. What are your thoughts on this opportunity, not just now, but like in the future of college sports and college sponsorships and gifts? What might be some ways your creative, innovative, curious mind might think of, and your background with universities, academia, how might people get creative or innovative with this connection, or this newfound connection between, say, the private sector and the area of sponsorships, gifts, and so on, and the college athlete?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's a semi-imponderable and it's a semi-ponderable. I mean, it really is. It's happening before our very eyes, Matt. And so, and as an academic, as an administrator at a university, I'm of two minds with it. Obviously, I mean, I'll have my critical mind is this kind of NIL, name, image, and licensing phenomenon a good thing? I'm enough of a purist. It's a lot like in 1992, and I know I'm going to get off on a little bit of tangent, but I promise I'll bring it back to answer the question.
I told you before, my mind is still in the Big Eight when it comes to college.
Yeah.
So we're speaking the same language there.
Well, and it's just it's hard because I remember, when I was a college student talking with some of the students that were on scholarship at my institution as an undergrad. And, I had friends who played football at my alma mater and other sports at Western Illinois University. And we were kind of a mid-range, we're FCS, Football Championship Series, which was at that time called 1AA. It's in between D2 and D1. And I remember just the typical, you got your scholarship and you could use some of it for books and apartment, and you got a little bit of, I think, a housing stipend, some other things. But, it was not we're going to pay you, $2 million as the top quarterback to be NIL money. And then that pays for your $35,000 tuition, room, and board, but then you get to do whatever you want with the rest of it. And you get to build your brand, your personal brand off of it, and sell, as I think Luther Burden, the star receiver for the Missouri Tigers, does, Emo's Pizza and other kinds of things.
I wasn't even aware of that already. So
well, I think he is. I might be speaking out of turn there, but there's no doubt.
That's cool. It's Emo's, though. That's wild.
The St. Louis Pizza. But here, and there is one in Columbia. It was the first pizza place in 1988 that I went to when I came to grad school there. But basically, it's interesting that NIL is all the way down to Division III. So we have player athletes, student athletes at my current university in Louisville, Kentucky, Spalding University, who have NIL deals, for the lack of a better term. But there's a lot. We're in a fuzzy world with this right now. I think the NCAA is going to attempt at some point to regulate it. But right now, it's kind of a Wild West. We talked a little bit about that with Coach Prime and how that was working out in Colorado.
Yeah.
But for the actual game, I think the idea of giving the players, Ford Broncos or whatever they were given, Ford trucks or whatever it was, is a really intriguing idea. Because I think there's an incentive type of issue here.
Yeah.
Is that the right? I'm going to sound like an old curmudgeon, but
Well,
is that the right kind of incentive when you have others on the campus, faculty, students, and so forth who don't
give all. We were both faculty before. Give all the faculty maybe not a truck, but at least like a golf cart.
Right.
Or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a Starbucks gift card would be nice for a lot of the faculty.
Let them eat lunch at the dining hall. No,
yeah.
No, but I want to look at things critically, even things that we may ultimately be in favor of.
Right.
It's always important to look at it from these different dimensions. That's why I appreciate this. And I wonder too, like, what's it make the other university? Like, it's cool for the Utah players, but now if you're at a different university, do you now have an extra?
Right.
Well, my car? Like,
to your point, Matt. I mean, if you're the third team punter, and you've walked on, are you the beneficiary of that kind of?
You got to wash their trucks.
Largesse versus the All-American kicker.
Yeah.
And Missouri has an All-American kicker. He's from right up the road here in Warsaw, Indiana, and I'm sure his NIL deal is a lot bigger than the fourth team running back. Now, the reason I say that, though, is that there should be in my opinion, a little bit of an egalitarian thing here, that once you're giving your top tier players the $200,000 NIL deal or the trucks and other kinds of incentives, or rewards for performance or whatever you want to call it, you would like to think that the walk-on would get $1,000 for showing up and helping make those players better, because they're probably the people who are on the scout team who are providing they're the LSU for the Missouri first team offense this week, and some go. I mean, I had a roommate at Mizzou years ago when I was in grad school, and he was on the University of Illinois scout team for multiple years, walk on, just because he wanted to play for the U of I, and maybe saw the field once or twice in 4 years, but he really was there to be as a matter of fact, it's a good day to say this. I mean, it's a sad day because Dick Butkus, the famous Bear linebacker, passed away, the Monsters of the Midway from the 50s, an Illinois linebacker, but he wanted to be the next Dick Butkus, but he got to be Dick Butkus as a reserve player for sharpening the better players on the starting 11. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. I also wonder too, though, there's an ethical dimension here. For example, university financial aid, not financial aid, university philanthropic, the development officers who raise money, they're not allowed, when they go out and raise $1 million, they don't get like in business. If you go out and do that as a business development person, you get usually a cut of that business that you bring. Development officers are not, by the Association of Fundraising Professionals, they're professionals. They're not allowed in a 501c3 to do that, from everything I've read. So that gets into the question of, we've professionalized this. We're now incenting it in a business sense. And I realize the big campuses, you have business operations going on under the broader 501c3 element in terms of, taking products and people getting copyrights for them and other kinds of things, and they're able to use that for their own gain. But that gets into some interesting questions too. And so, is it a matter of time before the average student says, "Hey, I just published a book. Why am I not getting a Ford truck like the?"
That's why I was wondering. I was going to ask you along those lines. Yeah. Or, I helped this research that accomplished this.
Yeah. But I think we're all realists enough to understand that the point I made last week about Coach Prime bringing $90 million of revenue through mainly social media intensive work, but also through more media attention in the country, because of diversity and other types of things, that we're just in a new era. And in all honesty, the point I was going to make earlier was, I was a purist. So, a former basketball player. I played in high school. I played in tournaments and things at kind of a high amateur level in college and so forth. Was recruited to play at a few smaller colleges, didn't do that. But at the end of the day, when we went from playing our college players in the international competitions with the Soviet Union and with the Yugoslavs, and who were really both good, and the Brazilians and others from Olympics to the FIBA, and then the Dream Team came on the scene, Larry Bird, Magic, and Isaiah Thomas and others in 1992. That was the beginning of the end of the amateurish, not amateurish, but the amateur hour in American sports. And so from that point, you now have the logic is what we're seeing with NIL. And the reality is, I mean, I feel good for the players because the coaches, as we're now seeing, the head coach is making, at the high level, the top 40 programs in the P5, they're making $4 million. The defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator are making $1 million. Number 15 coach is making 150 to 200,000. So you get my drift.
Let me ask you this, though, to kind of point, because I definitely get your drift, and I'm curious to point it in a very refined direction is because you're talking about the evolution of college sports. And I'm wondering if what's going on right now is really just kind of a hastening of this evolution, and is student becoming the vestigial tail of student athlete? Like, do you think we're sometime in this evolution of sports, these teams may still be connected or associated with universities, but the players on the team aren't going to collect. I mean, they're not going to collect.
It's a brilliant,
like where there's still that connection. We still have the students are supporting their team. There's still all the emotional side, the wear, everything else. But we just get maybe a little more honest or just innovative with how we treat this component. Yeah.
No. It's a very important question, because as you and I have talked, not necessarily in your programming on X, but offline, we've talked a lot about this over the years. This is a bigger question of let's be honest, the relevancy of the university and the importance of the university addressing how is it going to meet the needs of the 21st century workforce. And I've been having all kinds of conversations on my campus. And I know it's, having gone to a meeting, as you know, in Madison, Wisconsin, looking at both graduate and online education and other things this summer, and AI and its impact. There's a lot of concern, I think, in higher education, at least in the United States, on how do we remain connected to these trends? How do we remain, and I hate to use the term relevant because I know a lot of my liberal arts colleagues, we're always relevant because we teach about critical thinking, learning, et cetera. Well, it's true, but we must be able to convince students, both in the traditional 18 to 25-year-old or the non-traditional student, the working student, that what they're getting is worth its bang for the buck. I mean, and that is something that when they start to see,
I'm sorry, Rob, but let's
please.
I wish somebody would have said to me a long time ago, I think we need to start saying now, what if what they were studying could produce them a job that would provide them with enough resources to pay off what they're studying?
Great point.
It could be even more elegant than that. But conversation I think we also need to be having with students and studies. And again, I'm an English man. I mean, I went through it, so I'm speaking from experience. But and again, you're 18 years old typically when you're going through this. But it should, I think I would like to see on the university side a little more of those kinds of numbers, projections, conversations.
Fair question, 100%. And I think what has happened is the self-fulfilling prophecy that came about probably 15 or 20 years ago, where presidents across the country and academic leaders and others were saying, hey, the federal government's going to start stepping in to regulate what you're doing, both public and private. And it actually happened. And I remember back at my previous institution, back in those days when, even I was saying, hey, learning for learning's sake, which I still believe in as a true liberal arts person. Mm-hmm. But the question is when people get out, they have to have jobs. They have to be able to put food on the table. They have to be able to pay off, as you're saying, their education. And you don't just walk out of college. Most people, not all, and that's an overwhelming majority, don't walk out saying, "Oh, I can pay for this big chunk of money or pay back this big chunk of money I put down for my education." So
Yeah.
I agree with you totally. I think, and I think that's where this conversation is a positive one, in the sense of, at least now student athletes are going to be able to afford their education, and
Yeah.
they have a chunk of change they can set
Mhm.
aside for as a nest egg to get started in life. Most won't be going professional. I think that's great.
Yeah.
The next step will be, how do we do it for non-student athletes? How do we make sure
Yeah.
they can afford? And I don't, is the model what the Texas governor said? We're going to make
Not familiar.
10,000 a year is the top line that you pay, and you don't pay more? Or is the model bite-sized chunk credentials that you don't get a 4-year degree, you go for 1.5 and you take 4 courses, and more, we've talked about this, the German
Well,
model, where you go out and more utilitarian.
don't interrupt, but the my mind, I always look for part 3. If somebody says A or B, I always think of C, right? But in all, we can talk about another honest conversation. I'm all about honest conversations today. I don't know why, but with what ChatGPT, Open, AI, whatever, large language model, whatever you want to call these things, what they've done in such a short amount of time, and what they're going to be doing in the next short amount of time, we've already talked about the entire structure model we have for education is already obsolete. Like, the whole thing needs to be reshuffled. So I like both of the things. Actually, both of the things you said, I'm down with. But then I realized, well, yeah, but what if, with what's going on with AI currently, that we need to really rebuild from the ground, like almost even what did Indiana Jones says, that belongs in a museum. Just put the academia into a museum, and then just build something brand new based on the technology we have.
Yeah.
I'm I curious what your thoughts. This is just something I'm thinking of in the moment, but it seems like that's the future we need, is to really build something new rather than continue tinkering with what we've got.
Yeah, I think that's a really perceptive comment. And I'm a dean of graduate and professional education,
I'm
so
just a Tyler Durden education. Sorry, but anyway.
yeah, no, and I think these are the kind of self-reflective, leadership. What if? This all ties to curiosity, but it also ties to, the kind of core issues that we're really grappling with in higher education, is in not just leaders, but even faculty and so forth. And I think back to when essentially, the Harvard model, which was really and I'm forgetting the president who was at Harvard from about 1870 to 1900 or so, Eliot was his name, who really created the model of kind of, the old cafeteria model of courses, and the liberal arts gen eds, and specialization in in maybe 30 hours worth of coursework, and for your both your bachelor's and your master's. But the previous model to that was about 7 areas of 1 or 2 courses, 3 courses of things like rhetoric, philosophy, religious studies, maybe a little bit of political economy. It came a little bit later, but history, and then English and reading the classics. That was it. There really was not a lot more. And then, of course, heavy language, Greek and Latin, you had to know that too. That was the model for 200 or 300 years prior in Europe and here. And then Eliot really kind of, please go ahead.
No, then we needed factory workers.
Right, exactly. And then we routinize it and chunk it. And then the purists are saying we need to go back, and the progressives are saying we need to move forward. And, it's funny because, my wife and I were talking last night about general English. And I said, her complaint was nobody can put a sentence together anymore, and nobody can write, and so forth. And I said, it's funny. I remember thinking I could barely put a sentence together when I was in college, and I had a full year of both, grammar, syntax, and style. That was a semester in college, my first semester, and the second was composition, which I had also had in high school. So you look back, I mean, I think I probably had, 4 years of high school English, which was very diverse.
Yeah.
And so it was Chaucer in England and British literature and all that, but it was also radio and TV and journalism, and then basic English, Shakespeare and whatever. But what my point is, they've cut a lot of that out over the years, both at the high school and the gymnasium, and also at the university level. So my point is, how do you address the economic needs, but yet educate the whole person so they come out with the ability to be a lifelong learner? So I think this is it's a one step forward, two steps back, and it's been going on for 500 years, if not more. And it's something that, you add the other point, the cost. It's exorbitant, and it's very difficult for the average person to afford it. And this is what we're grappling with, I think, in higher ed. How do we get people to see the value? Because when they get out and get that professional job, they will be able to have fulfillment and hopefully be able to pay it back. The problem now is the ability to pay it back continues to grow in terms of longitude. And that's the issue we're going to have to start looking at. Is do you start chunking degrees in smaller and smaller compartments? In other words, do you go to 2-year bachelor's degrees and 3-year bachelor's degrees and things like that?
And then get people out into the workforce.
Yeah. So they can pay for it. Yeah. Right.
And exactly. It would, again, I'm the glass is 3/4 full, but it would be also interesting to see, because let's admit it too, college loans and everything else needs to be reshuffled, refigured.
Indeed, absolutely.
But one of the things I'd like to see in the future as it gets reshuffled is it'd be really interesting if an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old, whomever, about to jump into, as a freshman, they had an option of X amount in federal aid to go through, like you said, a 2 to 3 year degree for bachelor's degree, or X amount of money to give it 3 to 5 years a go for a startup idea or an endeavor that you can provide. It can't be, it can be substantial to get accepted for. I mean, it's not like, again, it's not just you apply and you get it. I mean, you have to get, there could be a process to it, but would be interesting if we started giving different routes for learning, and maybe it's even connected to university. You had to attend one course semester with there could be some,
or you work for the university, or you work for the regional
or a percentage government goes back to the university if profitable, kind of stuff. But something you didn't have, some sort of forgivable loan, and it'd be small amount, all chunks, but relative what's currently going on, and even smaller currently going on under the current model. And that could be several different ways that we could get creative. The idea is if you want an 18-year-old or a pre-college educated, whatever we want to define them, to go from point A to point B, from here to being economically viable, let's say, where they can provide for their family, and they're a net gain on the community, right?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter what it looks like between point A and B. If the federal government has Y amount of money to invest in it, we should really be looking for more models than one, I would think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And let me give you an example of something I read this morning, actually, which I thought,
oh, wow.
And it interestingly was it was Washington Post, I think. But it was about a Kentucky program, which I thought they're saying Kentucky is very innovative. And I was thrilled to see this. And I know some might disagree with this, but, I think the era of public-private kind of partnerships, or private-private, you and I have talked a lot about this concept, the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City and other areas that were working on these things for many years. So they found in Kentucky, they started a program. They were running out of child care workers. Not child workers. Yeah, human trafficking. It's not that. Yeah. I meant to say child care workers. So people who have little children like you do, and some folks may have to put them in child care at times and that kind of thing. They didn't have enough of them. So what the state did is they said, any childcare worker, we're just going to pay for your own childcare. So now they have 3,600 workers in childcare work in the state of Kentucky who are taking part in this program. I think they have probably 15,000 childcare workers.
Yeah.
But I read a quote from one of the workers saying, look, if it's me going to work in childcare at $12 an hour and I have to pay for childcare, I can't go to work. I have to go work $18 an hour, 20 at Target or whatever. And then I can actually maybe afford it. But they said, look, if I'm trained in pre-K and I go to work in this environment and the state is paying for my childcare, then I'm able to keep more real disposable income. Mm-hmm. Those are the kind of innovative ideas I think we need to be thinking about. And it's not really state or private. If Americans were to look at Europe, and you and I've been there, we've studied it, we've looked at it. Yeah. You've got public-private corporations. I'm thinking of historically, airlines, Volkswagen, Volvo. Some of these are owned by regional governments in Germany.
I didn't realize all that.
Yeah, partly owned by private companies.
I'm only familiar with former Yugoslavian companies that are now.
Yeah, exactly. Now, some of those ran, the hyperinflation ran some of those into the ground. But I will say, when you start to think about public investment and private investment and the two working together, there are some things that can come out of that. And I think what I'm trying to say is that, this kind of form of state capitalism isn't always a bad thing. Now, we do have it in the United States. The state works with, and I just saw that Alabama University, a very small private institution, was getting a big state subsidy to keep its doors open, essentially. And so, you do have some of that going on. But I do think when it comes to employment and the issues you're talking about with regard to what does your degree actually get you? Are you going to end up just getting a job making $12 an hour for the next 10 years while you try to pay off your loans? Yeah. There needs to be more vision on that and more accountability and transparency. I mean, I think that when you see that you can get a certificate in an area and it might be 1 year or 2 year, and counseling, career counseling people into, hey, try that, get into your company, and then maybe at 20 or 22, go back to finish off the bachelor's degree or
even find out that, in 2 years I can become an apprentice in a general contractor or a plumber or a carpenter. And then I'll be making so much money that in 10 years, I can take night classes in a reading club that's not even for a degree, or I'd have X amount of free time that I could have these hobbies and I can retire at, X age and all. I mean, just lay it all out there. These are the different, because you hear that all the time about like people in the trades. First of all, it was traditionally it's like looked down upon and stuff. And then you hear those are some of the highest paying jobs now, and they don't have a, college debt to pay for. And a lot of younger people, if they realized or did the math on that, it's like, well, wait a second, like that's a legitimate option.
And Matt, those are great points. And for me, if you read the history of higher ed in the United States and go back into the 1960s, when the population, the baby boom, this is growing, the baby boomers have come on the scene, or that's the end of the baby boom by 64, 65. But the 50s and 60s, you're seeing a proliferation of universities. We have like 5,000 at that. Prior to that time, the average student was at a very small liberal arts college. They were spending about $2,000 a year, maybe $7,000 or $8,000 total on their education. 65% of the students in America were going to the small liberal arts colleges, like a Lawrence, what's now a Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, or a Westminster College in Missouri or Salt Lake City, or Spalding College. It was Spalding College at the time for women here, a Catholic school in the heart of Louisville, Kentucky, Spalding University today. that's where most students were going, and the prices were not as expensive or exorbitant. But I think now, the idea is how do we start to think about getting back to having it being accessible and affordable as we see more diversity coming into the system, and frankly, the inability for a lot of folks, given the ups and downs of the economy, you know, in the global economy, how to make it more affordable. And I think that's the great challenge. And it's not just about learning. We want people to learn. We want them to come and have become thinking, and
But it's got to be a bridge to somewhere, though. It's got to be, and even more so. And I'm even saying that as a liberal artist, right?
Yeah.
Even the study of liberal arts, it's only they're valuable, but they need to be applied somewhere. Yeah.
Exactly. And I do think you're right. I think innovation, entrepreneurship, curiosity, the things you're an expert in, and the things that you do so well, these have been kept out, I think. And and I know some will say, well, that's not true, Kurt, because we've had entrepreneurship courses in business schools and things, but I'm talking about the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
How do we let actual applied innovation guide what students would really like to do? And how do we say, look, maybe a bachelor's degree could be this? I think of some of our friends and colleagues at one university in South Africa that you and I met with several years ago, that were doing, you did 1 week in the classroom with books and everything else, and then the other 15 weeks was an on-the-job training internship. And they were doing bachelor's, master's, and doctorates. And this was Nelson Mandela guiding, his academic team started this private university to give Black South Africans an opportunity to become entrepreneurs, if you recall that. And Matt, you led us in the What If experience. We had Silicon Valley people there in the heart of Missouri. We had Chinese investors and Chinese entrepreneurs. We had all of our students were there. But what was so cool about the gentleman who led that and that process was they were saying education, even at the doctoral level, can be purely applied. It does not have to be all of us just doing theoretical kinds of things.
So in some ways, you answer your question. There are models out there. Yeah, it can be done. I always say, like, in terms of our resources, time's the most valuable. I'd say curiosities are second most valuable. But even before money and everything else, I keep saying will. Just and I think that's what lacks we'll have a different conversation on that maybe. But there seems to be a lack of will to make the change in higher ed. And everybody can point, it's like that Spider-Man meme, everybody can point at each other.
Yeah.
And plenty of fingers to point, but it ultimately, for reasons I fail to understand.
Well,
there are models and it can be done, and there's evidence that better ways. But
absolutely, and you've studied the research, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but give me the final word on this real quick, and then you get really technically. It's your program. You get the final word. But let me just say this: what I think has happened. And we're seeing the end of kind of a system that's 1,000 years old, really. If you go back to, University of Aberdeen, where I stood on their campus in 2003, and Oxford and some of these other places, and even older universities in the Middle East, and Cairo and Alexandria and whatnot, and in Jerusalem and other places in Iraq and whatnot, Jerusalem and Israel. But the thing that's happened, Matt, and you've alluded to this, is that it was perceived and was true for up until probably even 50 years ago that the universities were the centers of learning, and they had the monopoly on learning and the application of learning. It's really no longer the case. Learning can be done anywhere. It can be done on these things. It can be done.
We're live on X right now. We have been for the last 30 minutes, and people can tune in at any time.
Exactly.
To keep going, you've hit on something.
No, there's no. So, I had a grad professor who was wonderful at the University of Missouri, Dr. Richard Hardy, and he used to say to us GAs when we were TAs working with him, he'd say, guys, nobody has a monopoly on brains. There are a lot of smart people out there, and you will get your papers published. You'll be able to write that textbook. You'll be able to go teach and create great classes. Just keep knowing that, academia is really more democratic than people realize. And that's what I'm saying here is that you're going to continue to see no monopoly on learning. It is everywhere, and that's one of the beauties of this process. And the universities are hugely important, but they are just one vehicle through which learning and knowledge comes. And yeah, we're going through a difficult time, I think, in higher ed, just with regard to
Well, it should be
continuing
exciting.
to make the case. But
Yeah.
we will rebound, and good things will happen, and we'll be we ebb and flow just like all organizations. But I do think we need to be realistic, all of us, whether in or out of higher ed, that we don't have the monopoly on education that we once did.
Yeah, that's gonna be the big takeaway today. But let's just close on that. We started about college football and sponsorships, and I'll try to connect the dots later. But we're going to close on no monopoly on learning. So that's a kind of a fun journey to go from college football trucks to students to no monopoly on learning. Thanks for getting curious again, Dr. Kurt Jefferson. Let's do this again next Friday.
Love it.
I think you just contributed to a lot of learning here on X and elsewhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Good talking to you.
Have a good one. Thanks.
Bye-bye.